You're listening to Privacy Notes. In 2018, the personal details of about 80,000 Nigerian patients who participated in the HIV/AIDS Indicator and Impact Survey were at risk of being exposed. The success of the exercise, which was one of the world's biggest HIV surveys ever, was almost diminished following the use of user-friendly and an open-source database management system that was not properly secured. That incident involved a lack of expertise or naivety on the part of the data controllers or administrators. This will be the focus of this episode of Privacy Notes. This edition looks at the concepts of the data controller, data administrator, and other related roles of the data protection officer. It also takes a look at third-party and data protection compliance organization as used under the NDPR, setting out their rules and time-sensitive obligations.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Privacy Notes, the podcast brought to you by TaxA Technologies Limited, TaxTech, and the NDPR Academy. Remember that TaxTech is your plug for all things data protection compliance, software development, and cybersecurity services. And the NDPR Academy is your plug for all things data protection trainings and certification. Today, I'm excited because I'm joined in the studio by my colleague Uwem, who is a data protection associate at TaxTech. Hi Uwem, how are you doing today?
Hi Rena, nice to be here on today's episode of Privacy Notes, the podcast. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic, we're glad to have you. So today on episode 10, we'll be talking about the data controllers and administrators. What do they do? What do the roles involve? I mean, this is not the first time that we're talking about data controllers or administrators, but we'll just try to reiterate. So the data controller is an organization or an individual who determines the purposes for and the manner in which personal data is processed. And the data administrator is an organization or an individual that processes personal data, usually at the instance of the data controller. I mean, they seem quite similar, but they are different roles. And we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about this in details. All right. Okay, and we are back. So like I earlier mentioned, we're talking about data controllers and administrators. What roles do they play? Is it interrelated? Are they different? I already mentioned that they're quite different, although they seem similar. So Uwem, please just kindly throw some light on this so that we can better understand it.
Okay, thank you very much, Rena. So I'll start like this. I would very briefly talk about the main law that regulates data protection in Nigeria. It's called the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation, the NDPR. So the NDPR actually makes provisions for two categories of parties who control personal data or who handle personal data. One of them is called the data controller, the other is called the data administrator. So just to make people have have proper understanding of the two concepts. Just think about it like this. Think about the data controller as the boss of the data administrator. So the data controller basically determines the use and the methods in which personal data is being processed. While he determines that use, whenever he transfers personal data to the data administrator, the data administrator processes personal data based on only the instructions of the data controller. He cannot process personal data outside the instructions which is given by the data controller.
Okay.
So that's why I said the data controller is basically the boss of the data administrator.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Just to better understand it, can you just give us an example of how we can place a scenario? So say someone is a data subject, someone is a data controller, someone is a data administrator. So we know how each of them play different roles and how it connects.
Okay, that's fine. So if we're talking about personal data. Personal data is actually any information that can be used to identify you as an individual. Personal data is only related to natural persons. That's a human being. Mm-hmm. A company does not have personal data.
Okay.
So assuming you are an employee, for instance, let me use a scenario. So if you're an employee of a company, for instance, let me use tax aid.
Okay.
So an employee of tax aid is also the data subject because the company has access to his name, address, phone number, email, and any other information which can typically be used to identify him as a natural person.
Okay.
So in this scenario now, the employee is the data subject because he's the one that gives out his personal data to tax aid. Tax aid in this scenario is the data controller because the company collects personal data from the employee. Okay, so also assuming that the company also has the health insurance company, for instance, whereby they have an arrangement whereby the health insurance company provides health services to the employee.
Okay.
So now tax aid transfers that personal data that it collected from the employee to the health insurance company. In that instance now, the health insurance company will be the data administrator.
Okay.
Because it's supposed to use the personal data to provide its services to the employee based on its arrangements with tax aid.
Okay, that's the data controller.
Yeah. So the employee is the data subject. The tax aid technologies is the data controller, while the health insurance company is the data administrator.
Okay, so sorry, just a little pause there. So the data subject is the individual lives in Nigeria or is a resident.
Exactly.
Of Nigeria. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So you are a data subject wherever your personal information is collected.
Okay.
Any company or individual that collects that personal information from you or personal data from you is the data controller. And if the information or personal data is subsequently transferred to a third party for whatever reason, the third party would be the data administrator.
Okay. I understood this perfectly, and I hope you did. And if you still need more details about this, remember that we have a class coming up on September 18th. That's the foundation class. And we have the practitioner class coming up on September 25th and 26th. Like I always say, we just touch the surface in this podcast. We don't really go into details. But if you want to know about it in details, then you should join our next class. You can send us an email at info@ndpracademy.com.ng, or you can visit our website, which is www.ndpracademy.ng, to learn more about our data protection trainings. And if you would like to be involved in any part of data protection compliance services, TaxTech, as I earlier mentioned, is your plug for all things data protection compliance. We are a licensed data protection compliance organization, so I'm sure that you would have a perfect time being able to protect the personal data of your employees or your clients, as the case may be. So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Mr. Femi Daniel, who is a DEX officer at NIDA. All right, we'll take a short break and we'll be right back. This is Still Privacy Notes, the podcast brought to you by TaxTech and the NDPR Academy. Today we are joined by Mr. Femi Daniel, who is the lead NDPR DEX officer at NIDA. That's the National Information Technology Development Agency. He also doubles as a facilitator and a faculty member at the NDPR Academy. Hello, sir. Welcome, Mr. Daniel.
Hello, good morning.
Okay, good morning, sir. So I just did a brief introduction for you. You're welcome to this podcast. It's brought to you by TaxTech and the NDPR Academy.
Thank you very much.
Okay, sir. So today we'll just be talking about what does a data controller really do. So we're on episode 10, and we'd just like you to share insights because this is your subject matter expert on this. I'm sure you'll be able to give us more than enough. So we're just looking at the general overview of the obligations of data controllers and administrators, and also how do third parties come into the picture, roles involving data controllers and administrators that's under the NDPR. Can you just give us highlights on this, sir?
Thank you very much, Rena, and TaxTech for this opportunity. The data controller under the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation is the core driver of data in terms of the fact that most of the responsibilities are directly associated with the controller, or that the controller is responsible or liable for the processing by third parties. So a data controller is someone who has the direct collects and processes data directly, or someone does it on his or her behalf. So in that regard, the data controller is responsible for the storage, for security, for all the processing activities related to the data. So for example, if you go to a bank and you give your personal information to the bank, and the bank wants to provide a kind of micro insurance, service to you through a third party, that bank would be the data controller, because you as a data subject have a direct relationship with the bank, while the bank has another relationship with the processor or the third party, as it were. So that, I think, summarizes the role of the data controller, who is held to be the most, critical person in terms of responsibilities as it relates to the implementation of the data subject's right.
Okay, so thank you so much for this. So basically what you're saying is that the data controller or administrator would play a huge role on basically protecting the personal data of data subjects, if that's correct.
Yes.
And so what role do you think that the DPCOs, as the data protection compliance organizations, would then play in between all of this, interrelated? What would be the major role?
Good. So the DPCO actually was contrived, particularly by the NDPR, as a gap, to bridge the gap between the controller and the regulator. The model that exists is that most data authorities, the regulators, usually have direct oversight over data controllers. But that model has proven to be inefficient and ineffective, especially in underdeveloped or developing economies like Africa. So what we have in the DPCO model is a hand-holding process for, number one, behalf of the regulator. The DPCO engages with the controllers and administrators to help them be able to move towards compliance, because it's more of compliance rather than enforcement, but both still goes together. So that is that. But from the side of the controller, the DPCO also helps in terms of helping to prepare, to bridge the gap between their understanding of the regulation and to have a DPCO who is dedicated and understands the processes far better. So what that has done for us in Nigeria, and which we think is a good model, is that it has helped us to be able to achieve more in shorter time with lesser resources from the regulator, and it has helped in a very efficient manner. So we think it's something that has succeeded, and of course it can still be strengthened, but right now it's a good model, and a lot of other countries are looking at what we have done here.
Well, thank you so much for your insights on this. As I earlier mentioned, Mr. Femi Daniel is a faculty member and a facilitator at the NDPR Academy, and we have classes coming up on September 18th, and I'm sure you would like to learn more from him. Thank you so much for your time, sir. Do enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
And we are back. This is still Privacy Notes, the podcast brought to you by Tax Tech and NDPR Academy. So UM has some final words for us with regards to data controllers and administrators. So please let us know.
Okay, thank you very much, Rena. I'll be closing with this. I'll just briefly be talking about some obligations and duties of data controllers and data administrators and things they can do to ensure that they're in compliance with the NDPR. So first advice or recommendation I would give is that data controllers and data administrators should appoint a DPO, a data protection officer, who will be responsible for ensuring that the company's data controller and administrator are compliant with the provisions of the NDPR. And the data protection officer is to be adequately trained in the rudiments of data protection. Like as Rena said before, the NDPR Academy is well versed in training of data protection officers and relevant data controllers and data administrators. And we actually have a course that's coming up on the 18th of September. That's the foundation course. It's basically an introduction to the rudiments of data protection in Nigeria. And we have the practitioner course coming up on the 25th and the 26th of September. The practitioner course is basically an in-depth analysis of the NDPR. We would be going further. I don't know if we did further maths in school. So the foundation course is like basic maths, and the practitioner course is like further maths. So the practitioner course is basically an advanced study of the NDPR. You usually advise that you partake in the foundation course before attending the practitioner course. So the foundation course is on the 18th of September, while the practitioner course is on the 25th and 26th of September. Just to clarify that both courses are going to be online, so you wouldn't need to be attending the trainings in person. So the next recommendation I'll be making to data controllers and data administrators is as regards contracts. This goes particularly to data controllers. Data controllers should ensure that they have agreements put in place between themselves and relevant data administrators to point out specific processing activities that the data administrators are going to be responsible for or are going to be performing on the personal data that the data controller is transferring to them. So this would serve to protect the data controller or indemnify him in the event of a breach which occurred from the data administrator actually leaving the prescribed processing activities that were given by the data controller and doing something that is outside the agreement. So this agreement will serve to indemnify the data controller. The third and final recommendation I'll be making to the data controllers and the data administrator is as regards security. So the data administrator should ensure that it has appropriate security measures and controls in place to ensure the security of personal data in all its processing activities before and during and after the transfer of personal data from the data controller. And also the data controller is also to ensure that these security measures are in place both in its company or in its activities and in the activities of the data administrator, to ensure that the data administrator has appropriate security measures in place before proceeding to actually transfer the personal data to the data administrator.
Thank you so much for that. And that was quite detailed, but like I always say, there's always much more that we can offer in the classes coming up on September 18th. That's the foundation class, and the practitioner class coming up on the 25th and 26th. Also remember, if there's been a breach to your personal data, you can report this on RDB, www.rdb.ng. Do not let a breach to your personal data go unnoticed. Please report this. Okay, till next week, I am Urena and
Wem. Thank you very much for having me.
All right.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Privacy Notes. On the next one, we'll look at the implications of transferring one's personal data.